And Cheryl, now I want to focus just a little bit. We're going to leave your mom and dad on you. So, you actually did a little bit of acting in Trail of Robin Hood, a TV show, a couple of episodes.
Oh, I did one episode of the TV show, half hour, called Outlaws of Paradise Valley. And then the one movie. And I provided the storyline idea for one of Dad's radio shows. I you know, being around the business when you grow up in it, it's fascinating.
And you also no, you didn't front, but you appeared in a music group. You were part of a music group too, the Frontiersmen?
Well, I mean, I was a very small part for a very short time. The Frontiersmen were big, and they went on, good Lord, forever and ever. And for 2 summers, they were really nice and let me sing with them. But they had backed Dad up on stuff, and High Pockets and all. They were big.
Well, good. Now, did you want to pursue a career in this, or?
Well, I think, like so many little girls, I dreamed about it. I didn't want to be in Westerns. I wanted to be in costume films, because those are what, you know, you go to see that. And Elizabeth Taylor, and, you know, beautiful clothes. And I thought that would be really cool. But then, as I got older, I mean, reality really set in. I wanted to be a script girl, I thought, because she sat right next to the director, and she was in charge. You know, the actors would come in and the hat would be on the wrong side, or they would have forgotten their hat. Now they call it a continuity person, but then it was the script girl, because it was almost always a girl. And I thought, you know, that was so cool, because women didn't get to do anything. That was the only job outside of a hairdresser or a wardrobe mistress or a makeup gal. In fact, even most of the makeup was done by men. So, I mean, the only big job on the crew was script girl. So I thought that would be really cool.
Did you ask your parents if you could become one?
Oh, yeah.
What did they say?
Well, by the time I was old enough, Dad, you know, was no longer making his own stuff and all, and he wasn't real encouraging about doing that, you know. And Mother's advice was, honey, go take secretarial courses, because someday you might have to support yourself. So yeah, that was her advice to all of us, is take secretarial courses, because of course that's how she had supported herself, and that was one of the few acceptable jobs for women when she had been a kid. So
you pursued other avenues then?
Well, I became a secretary for a long time. I mean, I went through the thing and became a certified professional secretary and worked in banks and law firms. Good stuff. So yeah.
And then when you were growing up, and here you are, you and your brothers and sisters with 2 very famous people, how did you feel about that? How were you and your family reacting towards that? Here's the 2 larger-than-life parents.
Well, being an extrovert and a ham, I thought most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, I thought it was really cool to do, you know, because we got to go places and we got to meet people, and not only Hollywood people, but I mean, Mom and Dad had their own safety campaign thing that ran coast to coast across the country, and they got submittals from grammar schools all over the country. They had a celebrity panel of judges, and they would go and present the first 2 trophies, which were miniature triggers. So I remember meeting them in Nashville one year when a Nashville school had one, and staying at the governor's mansion. And that was when the civil rights stuff was just heating up. So the people from the politicians from the other states, because something else big was going on in Nashville at the time, and I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, there's big riots in Memphis with the garbage men were striking, and that was Martin Luther King went there. It might have been around that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, this was just before that. Faubus was was really big, and I believe he was in Nashville at the time. And anyway, I mean, you know, we met politicians there, and then when I would join them as part of the act in Texas, we met the governor, and then I got to host the governor's brother and his family when they came out to California to visit. They'd never seen the Pacific Ocean before. And I remember taking Bill Daniels, Price Daniels' brother, and his family down to Malibu to see the Pacific the first time. So, I mean, I thought it was great. Dusty and Linda had a different slant on it. They're both like Mommy. And like Dad was, too. I mean, they were introverted, bashful, shy. Linda had a really hard time at school being Roy Rogers' daughter because she was so shy. I think for Dusty being junior, it was really tough. With Marion, she didn't come here. She's 6 months younger than I am, and she's from Scotland. She didn't come here until I was 13. I was 14, she was 13, and she couldn't be adopted because she was a citizen of the British Empire. And Jane Russell had just had that thing where the woman had thrown her child in Jane's arms and Jane adopted him. So immediately Parliament had passed this law that you could only adopt a citizen of Great Britain if that's what you were. So Mimi ended up staying here on a student visa and then marrying one of our classmates. It was very difficult for her because she had been shoved in as a teenager, right when you're the most vulnerable. And she wasn't a Rogers. Now, see, I thought that would be cool because she was a daughter but didn't have the Rogers name. So she didn't have to put up with as much guff as the rest of us did at school. And when I sang, I didn't use Cheryl Rogers. I used Cheryl Rose. I just dropped 2 letters out of my last name.
Oh, interesting.
And only because, I mean, I knew I didn't have the voice or the talent that they did. And having grown up in a household where all these incredible musicians would come, I mean, I was under no illusion whatsoever that, you know, I could make, well, I probably could have made a living doing it. I was a good backup singer. I knew harmony and all, but I didn't have Mom's voice. And you know, it was just a different thing. So it depends. You know, where you were, what your personality was.
The whole drive and the ambition, too.
Yeah. I mean, when I was little, the movie magazines, as we said before, the movie magazines were huge. And our pictures were plastered on 1 or more movie magazines every month. So we really grew up in a fishbowl. And we changed schools a lot because they moved a lot. So it was always having to make new friends and new connections. And it was hard, but again, being an extrovert, I didn't have as hard a time as Dusty and Linda had. And then Dodie later. I mean, she is just painfully shy. And I know that on them, it was really difficult having that fishbowl existence. And I found it inconvenient at times. But I don't remember, you know, it being really painful.
Okay, and then now in the 50s, there you were. Tell me about Hollywood in the 50s. Your
my take on it.
Your take on it.
Oh.
Like the people you associated with.
Well, it was wonderful. And I went back and forth between public and private school. And at that time, I mean, almost anywhere that you lived in LA, you were going to school with kids whose parents worked in the industry. So in grammar school in Encino, I went to school with Duncan Ronaldo's daughter, Stephanie, and with Bud Abbott's daughter. We had lived across the street in nursery school. I lived on Long Ridge in Studio City. So my carpool consisted of Dick Hames's son, of Susan Hayward's twins. Jack Carson lived across the street from us, and he had worked with Dad and everybody else. And his son, Junior, was in the car. And occasionally, Lou Costello's daughters, who lived, we all lived on Long Ridge. And, the valley was so small. The valley, even by the time I got to high school, you had North Hollywood, San Fernando, Van Nuys, Canoga Park. Then Reseda opened and Birmingham opened, but I had gone to school in Birmingham, and where I had lived in Encino, they split that between Birmingham and Reseda. I knew kids all over the valley, and anywhere you would go, if you went out on date night or anything, everybody went to Bob's. You might not go to Bob's in Van Nuys for dinner, but you might go to the Fireside Inn or something like that if it was a really fancy thing, but you'd end up at Bob's Drive-In afterwards, and we all would see each other. You couldn't really get away with stuff because everybody was at the same place that you were and did stuff. So, it was fun. The valley was fun. We were at a high school sock hop, Larry, my husband and I. And at the end of the sock hop, somebody would always, shout out, "Party at so-and-so's house." And I never told my folks who it was that had said "party at Cheryl's house," because I was with Larry that night, and we knew there was no party at my house. My folks had been out of town, so our housekeeper was in charge. Larry and I got home, and here's this string of cars and police cars.
Oh my God.
Because the kids at school had gone to Cheryl's house for this non-existent party. The housekeeper is hysterical. All of these kids are there. She calls the police, and Mom and Dad arrived from out of town.
Oh my God.
I didn't dare tell my dad 50 years later that it had been Larry, or Daddy would have killed him. So, but everything was so small. Those kind of things happen. And now we just can't imagine something like that here. There were big open spaces of groves and farms and horse ranches. Kellogg's had their Arab ranch in Chatsworth. And you could go up to Mulholland and Park, and it would be private, sort of, and, as long as you weren't going to get too carried away. But, now, it's when there's not a vacant lot anywhere, and where the things that were our landmarks are now, constantly being torn down. It's so different. But the 50s was a wonderful time to grow up.
And did you go to Malibu a lot?
Sure. Well, with Canoga Park, I think all of the schools had their own beaches.
Oh.
And with Canoga Park, we generally went down to Zuma.
Oh.
And that was where you would find the Canoga Park High School kids, was down there. And before that, it was really at Paradise Cove that I went, because Mom, when she and Dad got married, she bought a trailer. And she had to have a place to get away and be private. And so nobody, including Daddy, could go without an invitation.
Really?
Yeah. She was a very advanced lady. And so we spent a lot of time at Paradise Cove, where years later they ended up building a restaurant and shooting the Rockford Files. Wow. But we were down there a lot.
Was Paradise Cove?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff would she do there, just to work on her, or just to relax, or write, or?
She always kept journals, and she was a voracious writer as far as her friends went. She kept up correspondence with people her whole life.
Wow.
And all, and trying to write letters at home with all of us kids running around all over the place, was really tough. And yeah, she went there to write, and then later she went there to write her books, but she didn't write a book until Robin's death.
Mm-hmm. So she kept all those that place for a long.
Oh, she had it for years and years. Yeah.
That's just a place where she could go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was her hidey hole.
And were you part of the situation of the 50s with the Annette Funicello and all those?
Oh, honey, I was a Valley girl before there was a Valley girl. There weren't any Valley girls at the time, other than all of us that were growing up here. And, it's funny. I don't remember ever crossing paths with Annette, even though Dad had worked at Disney. We have so many friends in common. It's just incredible. But I knew kids from North Hollywood because Knut's boys went to North Hollywood. And there were other of the stunt people and all that, that lived out towards Hanson Dam and all, and in that area. So we knew kids all over. And you would go to a party in San Fernando, and you were bound to run into 4, 5, 6 different people that you knew from somewhere in the valley. And it was really cool. But yeah, I was a Valley girl, and Mimi was. We'd go to church. I was the pianist for the First Methodist Church in Chatsworth. And that was, Mom would let us out of the house and out of homework to go to church. And then we could be gone for, I think it was an hour and a half that we had after choir practice before we had to be back in the house. And Chatsworth had 2 paved streets at that time. Topanga Canyon and Devonshire were the only paved streets in Chatsworth. So we lived on Lassen, and we'd get in my Chevy. I had a 50 Chevy, Gertrude, and we'd fly down these dirt roads because that's not where the police were. I mean, there were so few police, we knew pretty much where they were. And we'd fly down to Van Nuys, race into the drive-in, order fries and Cokes to go, and we couldn't even stay to drink them or anything, and we'd have to race back home so we could make it home in time because there were no paved roads. So, but I think that was a Valley kid, that it's just where you were supposed to be that night. And yeah, we really thought we were getting away with something, it's very dangerous.
That's amazing.
Innocent times then.
They were. Compared to today, and there were drugs out there, but boy, the only ones that did drugs were just, the kids way out on the fringe that you didn't want to associate with and all. And it was just a really different time.